Do you like politics? Do you like being involved politically? It can be an area that Christians shy away from. Well, Islam is a political religion. It is as much a political ideology as it is spiritual. We saw in session 3 this political ideology is the formation of the Islamic State and the dominance of Islam on the world stage. And we are living at a time when there is a resurgence amongst Muslims to achieve this goal. Now, not all Muslims want this, but as Muslims come to countries like Australia, Christians are finding that whether they like it or not, they have to make political decisions about Islam. These can be issues like freedom of religion and speech, foreign policy, national security, multiculturalism, polygamy, or halal food. In this session, we are going to consider Islam and politics and look at the following areas: working for peace, working with Muslims, speaking with politicians and the media, and finally some areas of discussion. Let's look at the first, working for peace. Christians are to be peacemakers. This is because when we were sinners and enemies of God, God made peace with us through Jesus' death on the cross. And so living by the gospel means that this peace must shape how we live. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. And so as Christian citizens, we need to be working for peace within our society. This means we need to build bridges with the Muslim community. We need to listen to Muslim leaders and hear their concerns. We need to learn what aspects of Islamic culture we can appreciate and enjoy and what we have in common so that we can work together for the common good. We must insist that Muslims receive equal justice along with everyone else. We must not just react negatively towards Muslims, but must seek a positive engagement. And so it is important for the churches to get to know the Muslims around them. This is not the type of thing you should do by yourself, but with the support of other Christians. But what do we do when we disagree? I don't mean simple cultural differences, which I think we should enjoy, but differences where we strongly disagree. For instance, freedom to change religion. How do we work for peace when we disagree about serious matters? To answer this, we need to ask, what does a peaceful society look like? What are we aiming for when we say we want peace? Some people say that peace means having no conflict or disagreement of any kind. And so in the case of religion, this means all religions must agree, and anything that causes any disagreement must be avoided or censored. But this goal is not realistic. You cannot have no disagreement. People disagree. We disagree on how to run countries. We disagree in the workplace, within families, and religions disagree too. This is part of life. You cannot have no disagreement. But you can have peace. Because the goal of true peace in our world now is not to have no disagreement, but rather to deal with our disagreements in a peaceful way. And this is the type of peace that Christians need to promote. A peaceful society is where people are allowed to speak, disagree, and debate their ideas in a peaceful and respectful way. Now, some Christians are not good at this, and they get angry and abusive when they talk to Muslims. If that is you, then you need to stop. The Lord's servant must not quarrel. Instead, he must be kind to everyone, able to teach, not resentful. Those who oppose him, he must gently instruct in the hope that God will grant them repentance, leading them to a knowledge of the truth. Yes, we need to be firm and clear, but not abusive. Other Christians want to avoid any form of disagreement with Muslims, but this is wrong too. When Muslims are persecuting Christians, we have to speak up. When Muslims promote a different gospel, we have to publicly refute it. And when they want to Islamize our culture, we need to be part of the debate. Yes, we need to be gentle and kind, but we must not avoid our responsibility to speak publicly on these matters. And so, as we work for peace in our society, we need to be building bridges with the Islamic community and bold to speak on important issues in a respectful, careful, and thoughtful way. I now want us to think about working with Muslims. If we are going to work with Muslims, we must listen to them. We have to genuinely listen to them, and sometimes this will mean listening to their grievances. For instance, when Western governments support corrupt Islamic governments, this frustrates many Muslims. Or when people say all Muslims are terrorists, this frustrates Muslims and incites hatred against them. We must not think that we are without fault and that the problem is just with them. There are also some cultural issues that we need to be aware of. The first is that there is a war within Islam itself, and sometimes you may find you or your government on one side of it. Fighting within Islam has been there from the very beginning and continues today. And the Quran contributes to this warfare by commanding true Muslims to fight hypocrite Muslims. O Prophet, strive against the disbelievers and the hypocrites. Be harsh with them. A clear line of demarcation has been drawn between the hypocritical Muslims and the true Muslims, and instructions have been given regarding the treatment that should be meted out to the hypocrites. And so there is fighting between Sunni and Shia Muslims, between moderate and radical Muslims, with each side accusing the other of unbelief or takfir. Therefore, it is important to know who you are dealing with, because your support for them may be viewed negatively by other Muslims. The second cultural issue is the practice of Takiyah. Takiyah is an Islamic principle where a Muslim can pretend friendship with someone who is not their friend. Let not the believers take the unbelievers for friends, unless you have a fear of them. Ibn Kathir explains this. Those believers who in some areas or time fear for their safety from the disbelievers, in this case, such believers are allowed to show friendship to the disbelievers outwardly, but never inwardly. For instance, Al-Bukhari recorded that Abu Adada said, "We smile in the face of some people, although our hearts curse them." Al-Bukhari said that Al-Hasan said, "The Takiyah is allowed until the day of resurrection." I am not saying that all Muslims practice Takiyah, they don't, but it is part of the religion and does influence the culture. Therefore, we must not be naive about this when working with them. The third issue is how are we to understand the disagreements within Islam? For instance, one Muslim will say that Muslim women must cover their hair. Another will say they don't. One will say Islam is a religion of peace. Another will say it is not. What are we to make of these disagreements? Firstly, Muslims are not unified and have very different understandings of what it means to be Muslim. This is particularly the case when Muslims are free to practice their religion in a way they like. And so you will need to talk to your Muslim friend and find out how they understand Islam and then work with them as best you can. But there is another reason why Muslims disagree, and this has to do with the principle of necessity. Muslims are meant to obey Islam, but this obedience depends upon the situation. For instance, Muslims are not allowed to eat pig meat, but they can if necessary. He has forbidden for you only carrion and blood and pig meat, but he who is driven by necessity, neither craving nor transgressing, it is no sin for him. And there are many other examples of this. You can fake friendship if necessary, deny your faith, shorten prayers, not fast during Ramadan, and fight during the sacred months if necessary. This means that in some situations a Muslim can do something that Islam teaches against and still be a valid Muslim. This makes Islam very flexible, or dare I say slippery and confusing, but it is part of the religion and culture. We see this when Muslims deny what Islam teaches and what Muhammad did because it is necessary. Or Two Muslim leaders may disagree publicly, and we think that one is a moderate while the other a radical. But the truth may be that both want the political ideology of Islam and are just simply arguing over what is necessary at this time. Or consider the issue of suicide bombing. Most Muslim leaders reject the practice, but those who accept it do so on the basis of necessity. As Sheikh Yusuf al-Khwarizmi says, "When I was asked how I could permit martyrdom operations in Palestine, I said that they are a necessity because these people do not have bombs, so they turn themselves into human bombs. This is a necessity." You must understand the law of necessity if you want to understand what Muslims are saying to each other and to us. Jesus said, "I am sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves." We need to be wise as we deal with Islam and understand their culture. This means we need to listen to Muslims, understand the war within Islam, Takiyah, and the law of necessity. I now want us to think about talking with politicians and the media. I've spoken to many Christians who are concerned that politicians and the media do not take the teachings of Islam seriously. For instance, when there is a terrorist attack and the Muslims who did it explicitly say they did it because of Islam, but yet when our politicians get on TV, they deny this and say Islam is a religion of peace. Is that a frustration that you feel? Firstly, our media and the politicians are mixed. Some are sympathetic to Islam, others unaware, some in denial, while others are aware of Islamic ideology and concerned about it. Secondly, the media and politicians have to deal with many issues, and so we must not expect them to be experts on Islamic theology. Thirdly, our politicians try to balance the needs of everyone in society, and this rightly includes the welfare of Muslims, and so they are not interested in anything hateful towards Muslims. And finally, Islamic intimidation has been successful. There have been riots, terrorist attacks, court cases, and critics of Islam have been publicly killed. And this has trained our politicians to be fearful when they speak about Islam in a way that they are not when they speak about Christianity. With these things in mind, how should Christians speak with them? First, you must have the right manner. You need to be calm and sensible. You need to be honest about the complexities of the issue and not insist on a simple explanation. You must not be fear-mongering or hateful, and you need to take time to form a relationship. If you don't do this, then they will not listen to you. But I do want to encourage you to write letters, visit politicians, and engage with them about Islam. It may be a good idea to work with a team of people so that you can give each other feedback and improve what you say. We also need to encourage our leaders to listen to those who have lived under Islam. Many of these people now live in our countries and have experienced Islamic ideology firsthand. These people need to be prepared to speak, and we need to provide opportunities for them. The other way we can engage with the media and politicians is through our church leaders. They represent the Christian community. And if you have a concern, then meet with your bishop or denominational leader and tell them. Ask your denomination to make a public statement or have the matter raised at your synod or general assembly. I now want to consider some common topics of political discussion. The first is when people say that Muslims are not motivated by religion but by economic and political reasons. And so our political discussion does not need to consider religion. We need to acknowledge that economic and political factors are part of what motivate Muslims. Western forces in Islamic countries, unemployment and social problems can all motivate Muslims, but so too can their religion. From a historical point of view, Islamic religious ideology ruled much of the world for over 1,000 years. It has a longer, continuous history than democracy. Why wouldn't it motivate Muslims? It is the political structure they developed. And many Muslims are explicit in stating that these religious goals are what they are working to achieve. It is arrogant for Westerners to dismiss what Muslims themselves are saying and instead impose upon them a secular Western view. This leads to the next issue of Islamic law or Sharia. In many Western countries, there are efforts to have Sharia introduced for the Muslim population. Should Christians support this? I believe we shouldn't for the following reasons. Firstly, in countries like Australia, Muslims are already free to follow much of the Sharia. They are free to pray, have their own food, clothing, shops, banks, mosques, schools, and the radicals are free to preach hatred against Christians and Western values. Muslims can already practice most of the Sharia, and the law of necessity means that this is quite an acceptable situation for them. Secondly, the elements of Sharia that are banned for a good reason. Practices like wife beating, female circumcision, polygamy, child brides, killing of those who leave Islam, stifling free discussion, and discriminating against non-Muslims are practices we don't want in our country. And finally, if we allow Muslims to have their own separate legal system, even just for marriage, then it strengthens the control of the radicals over the community, and the nominal Muslims who want to be free of this will find themselves being compelled. The next issue is when people say Islam is a religion of peace. This phrase is often used and affirmed in the political sphere, and many Christians find it frustrating because it denies what the Quran and history teach. But what should we say? One common reply is to say that Islam is a violent religion. But this is not accurate either, or a helpful way forward. So what should we say when people say Islam is a religion of peace? We need to say that this is a cliche. Islam is a diverse religion. It is not unified. Therefore, you cannot say it is just a religion of peace. That is just too narrow. Yes, it has a peaceful stage, but it also has a radical stage, and these are both equally part of the religion. And it is from acknowledging this diversity that we can then invite people to learn about the political ideology of Islam. The next area I want to consider is history. The topic of history often comes up. Issues like the Crusades, European colonialism, and how Islam spread and brought the West science and philosophy. There are three problems we have when we talk about Islam and history. The first is that few people know this history, and so it is hard to contribute and judge to what is being said. Instead, we rely on cliches for or against Islam. We need to learn this history. Christian theological colleges and schools need to fill in this gap, and we need to encourage our universities to do the same. The second problem is the non-critical attitude that exists within our educational institutions towards Islam. Hence, in the study of Islam in the West, the dominant convention is that a critical approach is reserved for the Christian past, but forbidden for the Muslim past. The net result is a romantic picture of the history of Islam, avoiding and sometimes denying such issues as the jihadists' slaughter and massive enslavement of traditional African believers. And so many of our academics, politicians and media are just not prepared to accept what Islam has done. For instance, the Islamic empires are the largest slave trading empires in world history. They enslaved millions of people from Africa, Europe and India. The holiest city of Islam, Mecca, became the center of slave trade in the world and remained so well into the 20th century. From there, slaves captured and brought from East Africa and the Sudan were distributed to all parts of Arabia and the Muslim world. Or Islamic leaders like Muhammad Amin al-Husseini, who fully collaborated with the Nazis to exterminate the Jews. Or the aggressive jihad that spread the Islamic Empire and its discrimination against non-Muslims. This history is very important, but it is often denied. But it must be discussed if we want a balanced view of history. The third historical problem is just wrong history. Consider the Crusades. They are spoken of as unprovoked acts of Christian aggression against Muslims. but they were not. For over 400 years before the First Crusade, the Islamic empires waged continuous jihad against Christians, conquering their land and enslaving various populations. You cannot understand the Crusades without knowing the history of the jihad which provoked them. What about the claim that the religion of Islam brought science to the West and preserved the works of the classical world? Again, this is wrong. The first Muslim invaders did not bring science or learning with them. The Greeks and Persians they conquered were the ones who had the long tradition of science, philosophy, mathematics, medicine, and architecture. And it was the conquering Muslims who learned these things from them. The religion of Islam did not give us any of these things. We are told that Islamic Spain educated Europe. Yes, they provided some of the education of the Greeks and Persians, but they actually slowed down Europe because Europe would have got this information sooner had Islam not conquered the Christian world and isolated Europe from this area of learning. We are told that the Islamic world preserved the works of Aristotle when they translated them into Arabic. But again, this is false. They were already being preserved by the Greek-speaking people who wrote them. And since the Muslims only translated some books for preservation, it meant that many other books from the classical period were lost because of the Islamic invasion. Islam is involved in the history of science, but it is not the history that we are told. To conclude, Islam is a political religion and Christians need to engage with it politically. We need to seek a positive engagement with the Islamic community as we work for the common good. But we also need to be bold and speak up when we should and correct the false ideas that surround Islam.